Welcome back in, Geico Outkick Studios. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. Monday morning edition, breaking down everything in the NFL and in college football. And though I loathe him immensely, Joel Klatt is Fox's college football lead analyst, and he had a whale of a game between Texas and Oklahoma in the Red River Shootout, Red River Rivalry, Red River Showdown, whatever they call it these days. Joel, thanks for getting up early with us. And, I mean, it was an unbelievable game, right? I mean, and I want to start with this question before we even get into specifically your game. Does defense not exist anymore in college football?
Yeah, I don't know if I kind of put that out on social on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Basically, just like, can we stop with this whole, this whole notion or narrative that, like, well, this conference does play defense, that conference doesn't play defense. It's just like, look, defense is just dead everywhere. And you'll see it pop up here and there, like Kentucky. Apparently,
the only person who got shut down in the SEC was Mike Leach, which makes no sense because, I mean, his team went out and put up 600 yards passing against LSU. And maybe I got a good LSU question for you in general. But I think Georgia is elite defensively. But I've never seen, Joel, Alabama get torched like Lane Kiffin torched them on Saturday night. Now, to be fair
I'm sure
to
you've
Alabama,
talked about this. Did he? Was the little smirk at the handshake? Did he say, like, I thought they played defense in the SEC? That's what I thought. Like, I've heard that's what he said to Nick, and that's what was like the little like exchange with them after the game.
And so I need to get Lane on the show again here soon. But we had Lane on a while back, and when he coached at Tennessee, they lost the first year that Alabama won the national championship. When Mount Cody blocked that kick and everything else happened with it, there was like at the end of the game, Kiffin gets the kick blocked, they don't win, comes on, out to midfield, then goes to shake Saban's hand, and he said, "We'll get you next year." And I mean, first of all, it's such a cocky thing to say, right? But I think Saban kind of loves it, right? I think he likes Lane Kiffin's cockiness, even though that's not really the Nick Saban persona. I think he respects it. And even like Kiffin calling him elderly and everything else. I mean, I think he knows Kiffin is different than he is, but I think Saban respects it because he respects the fact that Kiffin is a really good football mind, right? I think if you're good at something, even if you're not the same exact personality as someone else, you kind of respect their talent in some way as well. And I think that's where we are. But I mean, the most amazing stat I saw, Joel, about that game wasn't even about what Ole Miss did. It was that the Ole Miss defense, did you see this stat? Alabama got the ball 11 times.
It was basically like possible yardage, like total possible yardage.
Total possible,
gained all but like 29 possible yards.
All but 41 yards. Like if Ole Miss had not even had defense, I believe the number is Alabama got 723 yards of offense, right, which is unheard of. And if there had not been a defense aligned against them, they would have, and everybody knows me doing like, they would have gotten 764 total yards. So Ole Miss's entire defensive game plan took away 41 yards of potential Alabama offense in the entire game. They stopped Alabama at the 1 yard line and got a turnover, and they stopped them also at made them punt from the 40. That was it. That was all they did the whole game.
So here's what's so wild is that we're seeing that everywhere, right? I mean, even and it's even gone back a couple of years. We've seen great defenses show up in playoff games and even Alabama teams and give up a ton of points. Remember those Deshaun Watson Clemson teams that were playing Alabama in the national championship? It just turned into absolute shootouts. And
even Auburn against Alabama with Nick Marshall. Remember, like it was like Alabama suddenly realized, okay, we've got to score 50 to win games, and it kind of changed the way that Saban calls football. But
not only that, but it's changed the way that he looks at his staff. Remember, that's when he went and got Lane, and he kind of changed his whole mantra about like, hey, we're going to run it and play great defense, and now it's we're going to play exceptional offense, explosive offense, and by the way, Sarkisian. Man, I tell you what, he is doing something right because that's as explosive and as quality of an offense as there is in the country. And I know for a fact he was up for a couple of jobs here in the off season and was basically the number one guy. And I don't know what he was promised, or if anything, but I think there's a reason he's still at Alabama, in particular with where Nick is at. You've speculated on this. I don't know how long Nick is going to coach. I think the next coach at Alabama is probably their offense coordinator.
Oh, wow. I mean, that would be really – I mean, that's assuming Dabo's not going to come, things like that. But that's pretty fascinating to think about how exactly that might shake down. We're talking to Joel Klatt. All right, we had the big win by Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher. We had the Clemson domination of Miami. Georgia in the second half just put a whipping on Tennessee. What stood out to you?
Tennessee just wasn't quite ready yet.
That's right. What stood out to you the most about the Contenders' performances in college football?
I was most pleasantly surprised, I guess you could say, with Georgia, because I just thought at some point this quarterback is just not going to cut it, and I think Stetson Bennett's a decent player, but and listen, maybe Tennessee's not the team that he's going to have to, step up there and go blow for blow. And maybe that's going to be Alabama. But then Alabama, gives up 1,000,000 yards to Ole Miss. I think that one was my biggest pleasantly surprised. I'm like, okay, Georgia's really, really good. And then there were a couple that I was just like incredibly disappointed in. Really three, to be exact. Florida, LSU, and Texas. Yeah. Those three teams, I didn't get it. I didn't understand the result. I don't understand how Florida goes to A&M and loses that game. And I know A&M is good, but it's like, to me, Florida was that team that I thought was going to be the team in the East, in particular with where Georgia's quarterback position is. LSU, I mean, give me a break. And Texas had all the pressure on them. They're not supposed to lose that game to a rebuilding OU team that's won or lost back-to-back Big 12 games for the first time since the John Blake era, right? I mean, so those were the three I thought most disappointing.
What happens now? Like every year it feels like Texas and Oklahoma, it hasn't been the case that both of those teams are really, really good, where for a while it was, right? But the last few years it's been like, oh, whoever loses – it's like the loser has more to lose than the winner has to win. Does that make sense? So I felt like at the end of that game, if Lincoln Riley had lost, I know Lincoln Riley's had a tremendous amount of success, but 0-3 in the Big 12, it's like, oh, what in the world's wrong with Lincoln Riley? And if Tom Herman had lost, which he did, it's like, man, Tom Herman, I was looking at the stats. I think he's 27-17. Am I right about that, in 4 years now at Texas or something like that? Maybe that's his Big 12. That's his Big 12 record, maybe.
That sounds about right. I do know that he has lost 17 games, and the reason that I think that's significant, in particular for the Texas fan base, is that from 2001 to 2009, so basically just short of a decade, Mac Brown lost a total of 16 games. Yep. And only 5 of them to unranked opponents. And now, since OU was unranked, that's the 7th loss for a Herman Texas team when they were ranked, and 7 losses to unranked teams. That's just, I don't think that's going to cut it. So to quickly backtrack, I thought Lincoln, because of where their roster is, because of all the opt-outs, transfers, everything going on with OU this year, I thought that he had enough equity in the bank, if you will, right? Like investment, where he was going to be just fine. Now, would they have liked to lose that game? No, obviously, and people would have been grumbling here and there, but that's all it would have been was grumbling. Whereas at Texas, now this is going to be a lot of momentum, right? People down there are not going to be happy. They're going to, in particular with the way that it happened. It's not like Texas went out there and played great against another great team and lost. They played really average and sloppy again against what I would classify as the worst OU team in the last decade, probably, with several young players out there. And they lose because they're undisciplined and don't make the plays when they need to. And that's just not going to cut it, right? So I think that there's an immense amount of pressure now on Tom for the rest of the season. He might have to roll the table, if you will, during the course of the rest of this season.
Yeah, and to recircle back on that, 27-17 now in 4 years at Texas, 18-12 in the Big 12. as he works now through his 4 years at Texas so far. So that's where he is. Big picture. Georgia, Alabama are playing this coming weekend. It's going to be a monster game in Tuscaloosa. Who do you make the favorite? Who do you think wins?
I feel bad for Georgia because they've looked bad. Yeah, like I just can't not say Alabama should be the favorite, and I think that they're going to win.
Yeah.
Right? Because like even if the Georgia defense plays really well, I just that offense is insanely good.
Yeah.
And they're going to score, I think, 35 plus points.
And you question whether Stetson Bennett can get to 30 or 35.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And that's I think I would favor Alabama by probably 3.5, 3 and a hook probably at this point. I'm sure that the odds makers are going to put them up there by 6. Is that what it is? I don't even know.
I think that Bama opened 6. Dub, what is the absolute number now? It's come down some?
Yeah, I'm seeing -4 right now.
Okay. So I saw it open around 6.5 was the first number that I saw hung. So some early money came in on Georgia. I do think that we're going to see like kind of an old school physical style game because basically Kirby Smart runs the same defense that Nick Saban has been running his entire time at Alabama, right? Kirby has just built another version of Alabama at Georgia. And there's been a lot of people who have tried to do that. Tennessee's trying to do it with Jeremy Pruitt. And, most of them haven't been able to do it, right? Because Nick Saban is Nick Saban for a reason. But Georgia has gotten the closest to basically mirror imaging what Alabama tries to do.
Clay, if I was Alabama, here's the thing I would do is I would commit every resource possible to forcing Stetson Bennett to be the reason that Georgia is successful, right?
Yep.
So from my seat, Georgia cannot run the football if I'm Alabama. They cannot run the football. If Stetson Bennett throws for 350 and you end up losing, you tip your cap and you walk in and you say, okay, we'll probably see him in the SEC championship game, and we'll figure it out then. But if he throws for 200 and then they run for 250 and you lose, shame on you. So, and I think Nick Saban knows that. And I think that they're going to be able to, like I said earlier, score 35, probably 40 points, even against a really, really good Georgia team. So I think Alabama will win, and I think that's the reason is because I think that there's a clear path, a clear strategy, in particular for a good defensive mind like Nick Saban to go against that Georgia team.
The other big takeaway, I would say, in terms of looking down the line towards the college football playoff was Clemson seems to love stomping other ACC teams that dare to try to ascend to their throne, right? And what I mean by that was they just went out and absolutely obliterated Miami. And now Notre Dame is the last team kind of on the horizon, I would say, in the ACC that has what feels like a legitimate chance to challenge them. Does Notre Dame have the horses to challenge Clemson, or are you basically riding the Tigers into the college football playoff?
Well, think about it this way. Notre Dame has to beat them at a minimum one time.
Yep.
Because, they're like there's no divisions, if I'm not mistaken. They're just going to put the top two teams win percentage-wise into the ACC championship game. And so because of that, even if Notre Dame loses this game, they're going to have to eventually beat them. I just don't think that they have the horses to answer your question. And here's the other part of this that I think is fascinating. Don't you kind of feel? I kind of feel like I can't even. Gerard Butler was in that 300 movie.
Yes.
And I can't remember his character's name off the top of my head, but remember, like the 300, they like relish the opportunity. They're like, oh, we finally have a battle that's like worthy of us.
Yes.
Right? Like, I get the sense that that's how Clemson goes through the ACC schedule. They're bored out of their minds. And then it's like, finally, a team that everyone thinks can run with us, can play with us, can be on the same field with us, can potentially test us. And they relish that opportunity. They've won. I think they've won now 36 straight non-college football playoff games. How about that?
It's unbelievable.
That's an incredible run, and I think Notre Dame is the next team in that crosshair, where it's like they are just licking their chops to be on a field in which they feel like they could be tested, or there's a thought that they will be tested. And with that defensive line, as they get more experience because they're young, and with that backfield, Clay, think about this. You watched football all day on Sunday yesterday, right? I watched a lot of football as well. Travis Etienne and Trevor Lawrence are NFL starters right now. Travis Etienne is a number one featured NFL back in a Clemson uniform, right? Like almost any of those teams out there, maybe save for Carolina when McCaffrey's healthy, or New York when Barkley's, like he's going to get selected and be a featured back. Right, like that's what he is right now. Trevor Lawrence is an NFL starting quarterback right now. He's one of the top, probably I would even put him higher than the top 32. Trevor Lawrence is a top 30 quarterback on the face of the planet currently. Right? Like this is not like he needs further development currently. That's what you're facing when you face Clemson. Let that sink in for a moment, right?
Oh, I think you're seeing it right now with why LSU is so bad. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit when we come back. I'm going to talk about that more. But I think there's a strong argument that the reason why LSU has fallen off the planet is not because they lost a lot of talent, right, with Edwards-Helaire and with Justin Jefferson just on the offensive side of the ball. But I think it's like when Auburn lost Cam Newton, right? I mean, they were an 8-4, 9-3 caliber team. And all of a sudden, LSU is like, man, everybody's like, what happened? Well, the answer is suddenly they don't have Superman under center, and it makes a big difference.
Think about what happened to even Urban Meyer's Florida teams after Tim Tebow left.
Oh, that's exactly right.
After Texas went, they did VY, then Colt McCoy, who was incredible, and Colt left, boom, they were done. So it's like it happens to a lot of people, and you're absolutely seeing that at LSU. There's no doubt in my mind.